Good afternoon. Now, I assume because you're in the Sustainability Hub that you're interested in sustainability, and even more specifically that you're interested in our topic this afternoon, which is on the display screen board, if anyone's familiar with Radio 4 comedy shows. My name's Leonie Cooper, and I am both the co-chair of SERA, but I'm also the London Assembly member for Merton and Wandsworth. This is chair of the Environment Committee in London, and I've also been the lead on energy and environmental issues for Labour. I'm a Labour and Cooperative member, but for Labour in London since 2016 when I was elected. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce, we've got a great panel for this afternoon, and I hope you're going to get a lot out of the session, and we will be, obviously there'll be time for questions. And thank you very much to SUEZ and the Chartered Institute of Waste Management who are partnering with SERA on this event. Also, thank you to Clyde, Loakes and Rezina Chowdhury, who are both councillors, but also bring a lot of expertise around the waste management piece. Clyde and Rezina are both involved in two of the waste authorities in London, the North London Waste Authority and the Western Riverside Waste Authority. And I think I'm right in saying that they both chair their respective authorities. Yes, they're nodding, so I've got that right. I know that Rezina chairs the Western Riverside Waste Authority because until June of this year, I was actually a member of that myself with Rezina. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our speakers to make some initial contributions, and then we will come to you as the floor, not the audience. We expect some participation. And I'm going to start with Dan Cooke. Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for turning out after we've heard a speech from the big dogs this afternoon, shall we say, to come and talk about something as exciting as the emissions trading scheme for energy from waste. I tip my hat to you. But this is important stuff because talking to big dogs, if you are a broad follower of what's happening in the resources and waste sector at the moment, we have a whole raft of change, and we at CIWM tip our hat to government for implementing a series of measures that we've been calling for the acceleration of delivery on for quite a long time. So we have extended producer responsibility for packaging, which has been introduced, and big checks have landed on the desks of local authorities, which should encourage a shift in the recycling rate and is a shift of costs onto the producers rather than the taxpayers to pay for recycling and the dealing with materials. We have simpler recycling, which has been introduced, which means consistent collections and separation of materials for recycling has been introduced for businesses and will be introduced across all local authorities in England next year. We have potentially landfill tax reform, and we've got a DRS and a whole raft of other stuff, but ETS for energy from waste, that's the emissions trading scheme covering energy from waste, is another part of a big moving jigsaw. Energy from waste is set to become the third biggest sector CO2 emitter after power and oil and gas industries in the ETS scheme by 2030, and DESNZ and government can't ignore that. Energy from waste returns for operators, but the energy prices have been very high of late over the last couple of years, and again, Treasury has taken notice. And therefore they have decided, and we believe they will undoubtedly drive through the introduction of emissions trading scheme allowances to energy from waste operators. And we've had the detail. There has been a whole raft of consultation. There's been cross-party stakeholder groups that have met, debated the best way of introducing this. And we are now going into a voluntary monitoring period for 2 years where operators can gather the data and decide on how best to allocate the costs, because these costs will be passed through to the local authorities, their customers, and commercial and industrial customers. So it's now a very important time for operators to fully take part in that monitoring voluntary scheme to work out how the data can ensure proper cost allocation. But the title of this session is about local authorities, and public sector, the public sector, local authorities rely on this service. Policy and regulation has led to this as the main solution for non-recyclable waste over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and the waste keeps coming. So local authorities are somewhat caught in the middle, and the opportunity now is to prepare and work out how to avoid getting caught in big and complex contract legal disputes where the lawyers are the only winners in arguments between the operator and local authorities. So local authorities do have an opportunity to act now. And Adam's report, that I'm sure he'll talk about the highlights of, has pointed out how local authorities can begin to prepare to deflect these costs and how to make the system work, all aligned with those other big bits of legislation that we've talked about. It's complex. We'll talk more, but that's my opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Dan, for sticking to time and also teeing up an introduction for Dr. Adam Reed, who's going to be our next speaker. I think we were only very recently in a Teams call talking about the problem that a proposal for an anaerobic digester, which would help us deal with food waste in London, was turned down at a planning committee, which has outline planning permission for waste activities, but apparently not a preference for dealing with food waste, which is a bit awkward because we are obviously moving in the direction of segregating food waste across London as well as everywhere else. So what we're going to do with it, if we can't have any AD anywhere, is anybody's guess. So Adam is going to tell us what we're going to do with it and talk about the situation, because obviously, as we move forward into the new arrangements that Dan was just touching on, how we do that is obviously crucial. Adam.
Thank you for teeing me up, Leonie. And I won't name the authority, but I think they're going to have to export their food waste in the future to some other local authority to deal with. We'll leave that one in the ether. It's a pleasure to be here. SUEZ is committed to a transition to a world without waste and where resources are valued. So I think recognising that ETS is all about taxing the non-recyclable fossil-fuelled materials that shouldn't be in that waste stream is an absolutely right thing to be debating, and we are fully behind carbon taxation in one form or another. The key thing is, have we got the time and the wherewithal to plan that transition when local government has got the kind of problems it's got with its budgets right now? So to set the scene, by 2028, when ETS hits the energy from waste market in the UK, remember that 75% of all inputs to UK energy from waste facilities come from local government. So you're picking up the big bill. We're going to be looking at probably a £50 increase or a 50% hike on your disposal costs. Now, that might not seem a lot to some of you, but let's be honest. If it's £50 per tonne or a 50% increase per year, and you've still got 20 years of your contract to go, I've got one local authority who won't be named who's looking at an £8 million hike in 2028, which means a £160 million additional burden over the 20 remaining years on the site and the contract. That's a big number that you haven't got in your budget. So why do we commission a report with SERAs? We commission a report because ultimately there's things that we can do, and collaboratively. I represent the waste and resources sector. We've got lots of infrastructure and facilities, but equally I've got lots of customers that are in differing degrees of pain. And I think it's important that we help showcase what the opportunities are. So this report from SERAs is all about the art of the possible in a very tight time frame. So a couple of headlines. If we were to implement most of the government's new policy reforms that Dan's alluded to and Mary was talking about earlier on this stage, things like curbside recycling, things like food segregation, plastics, textiles management, if we then target those efficiently and effectively and deliver on our EPR and our simpler recycling guidance, then we mitigate the bill because they're not in your residual. If you then target your your electricals and your hygiene products, which are the other two that will be left, you reduce your bill under ETS. If you then target your HWRCs, your tips, your CA sites, depending on where in the country you are, we can go rock and roll with black bag sorting, because people coming into your sites, in Manchester we've done this, they've got stuff in there that counts towards carbon tax. Well, let's help them get it out before it goes in the wrong container. And then finally, I'm going to give it a plug because I love a bit of reuse and repair, don't I, Councillor?
You certainly do, Robert.
Thank you. And up the revolution. And therefore, there's so much more we can be doing. And I'm just going to give a little plug. There's a declaration at the back. If you're interested in reuse and repair, there's a lot of organisations working collaboratively, SUEZ included, to make it more prominent in government legislation. But the key thing for me is there's so many of these interventions, you don't have to do them all, but you've got to do one of them and then build momentum. And so the art of the possible in the report, and that's available. There's a little Q codes at the back. Give it a little bing on your phone or take it away, and then you can download it hot off the press. But it's in there, it's real, and I appreciate that it's painful, but not everybody's aware of it. And I think, part of Dan and my job is to help some of our authorities understand, and the UK local government sector more generally, that you are stuck with the issue, but you can choose how to manage it. So I'm not here lobbying against government and saying stop. What I'm saying is let's get on the front foot and not wait to 2028 and then we're all panicking. Let's start to plan for reuse and renew hubs. Let's start to plan for your efficient and effective curbside recycling rollout. Let's look at flexible plastics. Let's go after WE collections, because all of these materials are going to reduce your risk and therefore reduce your bill. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And it's good to see there's a bit of a love-in going on between the platform and the front row. But I'm now going to introduce Clyde Loakes. I probably ought to say Clyde Loakes MBE, I believe. Clyde and I have appeared on various platforms at the Resource and Waste Management Conference. So obviously I've done some work in this area as well. I think that's why I was asked to be the chair of this session, including a couple of very large reports through my role as the chair of the Environment Committee on what we should be doing in London. And obviously there are issues across the whole of the country as to how we deal with things. And Clyde is going to be a great person to outline his thoughts on this, because he's been involved as a councillor in Waltham Forest for almost 28 years, I think now. Yeah, he was only 12 when he was elected, obviously. But he's also been more importantly, probably the chair of the North London Waste Authority since 2007, and is an absolute expert in this area. Over to you, Clyde.
Always learning. It's always a school day, Leonie. Thank you for that introduction. Starting really is that ultimately the North London Waste Authority, like all waste authorities, is at the receiving end of billions of individual decisions. The way a manufacturer designs a product and the material it contains, the wrapping a retailer uses to package its stock, the choice a resident makes to throw away a crisp packet, an empty cereal box or an old jumper, as well as policy decisions made at national level. As a consequence, we deal with, in North London, roughly 223 tonnes of waste every hour being disposed of. It's a mammoth task when you're looking after the waste of 2 million citizens. It's worth emphasising, though, that in the North London Waste Authority, we do loads of the things that Adam has just referenced. In fact, we probably push the boundaries the most, certainly in London and probably across the country, in the things that we are already reusing and recycling, whether that's mattresses, vapes, expanded polystyrene, carpets, hard plastics, and we are now exploring how to deal with adult hygiene products as well. And our waste prevention programme, the biggest in the UK, is helping community groups to foster circular economy practices at the grassroots, from repair cafes and repair vouchers, Adam, we're already doing it, the first in the UK, to composting products. But the ETS, the Emissions Trading Scheme, is intended to work by incentivising those who produce carbon emissions to change their behaviour. And it could be a solution. Yet we don't charge people in the UK on what they put in their bin. And I have no direct power over what 2 million residents in my area buy and how they use and how they then dispose of those products. I have no powers, no control in that space. The weird thing is, recycling, reuse is a voluntary endeavour in the UK. It's not a compulsory endeavour, and you would expect with the seriousness of the climate emergency, that it would be a compulsory endeavour. We do not control the content of the volume of waste. We must collect and dispose of all the carbon it contains and emissions it generates. The buck should not therefore stop with us. It is manufacturers and retailers who are responsible for the design and state of the products which become waste for us to manage. A well-designed system would encourage the use of more sustainable materials and longer-lasting products. The government has made a step change in the right direction by confirming that the ETS cost burden will in part be met by the EPR, but it needs to go a lot further before that date of its implementation, so that all products with emissions are paid for through EPR. And just finally, Leonie, I was told 8 minutes, so apologies. I'm trying to scan through my notes. We also need to see proper investment into recycling infrastructure so these all products can be processed. There's a huge gap in markets and infrastructure in the UK. Soft plastics, there is nowhere for soft plastics to be reprocessed that we are already collecting in those trial and pilot areas in supermarkets. They are just being baled up and stockpiled currently. Government action is needed to ensure this material is successfully diverted from EFW. Policy should be in place to drive demand for recycled materials and support the markets that they create. A comprehensive waste decarbonisation strategy is also needed, addressing that need for new technology and infrastructure. And finally, we are glad that government has shown its commitment to carbon capture, but they need to deliver a strong strategic direction to make it effective at scale and realistic for disposal locations like ours in North London to decarbonise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clyde. That's fantastic. Now, last but by very much no means least, we also have the Deputy Leader of Lambeth, and it's interesting that both Clyde and Rezina hold this portfolio that includes dealing with waste and are both the Deputy Leaders. And I think that gives you a sense of the importance of this as a portfolio for many local authorities. I think things are very different in Western Riverside Waste Authority because until 3 years ago, the chairs had been Conservatives for a long number of years. And so Rezina has had a bit of more of an uphill struggle, I think, to try and turn the ship around. And as I've just revealed, I was until a couple of months ago, I was part of the Western Riverside Waste Authority myself. So I'm rather familiar with the struggle. But the struggle to move Western Riverside forward is something that Rezina has been very much at the forefront, and I'd like her to wrap up the introductory remarks now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leonie. It's a privilege to be on this panel. Everyone here is far more qualified and experienced to talk on this matter. So I feel a bit of a fraud here, Leonie. But I'm going to speak about from the Western Riverside Waste Authority perspective, because when, Clyde was talking about what he's done at North London Waste Authority, and we can only just look on and admire the ambition and the achievements because we want to be there to be able to do those. But it's been, we've got 4 different boroughs that make up the Western Riverside Waste Authority, Wandsworth, Lambeth, Hammersmith and Fulham, Kensington and Chelsea. And for many decades now, there's been a kind of imbalance where some boroughs have been quite ambitious about doing things, others not so much, and so it's been difficult to get. It's been fragmented, and so it's been difficult to get some kind of coherence there. But we're slowly changing the culture and the organisation because we're very ambitious about the kind of things we want to do. But on the energy from waste, I just want to say a few words about bringing that into the emissions trading scheme and how local government can lead that change. And it's something that sits right at the crossroads of climate action, public service and social justice. So how do we do it? So we need clear rules on what counts as emissions and how we measure them. So not all waste is equal. And we need to be honest about what's coming out of those chimneys. So local authorities should push for proper monitoring and transparency. So we're not just ticking boxes, but actually cutting carbon. And then we need to use ETS to drive better behaviour. So if we're going to include energy from waste in the scheme, then let's make it work for the public good. So that means rewarding facilities that invest in new technologies like carbon capture, that improves efficiency and that diverts more waste to recycling. And it means making polluters pay, not just financially, but in terms of accountability. Councils can help shape those incentives so they're fair, progressive, and aligned with waste hierarchy. And third, we need to protect our communities. So we can't let this become another burden on working people. If ETS costs get passed straight on to residents, or it pushes more waste into landfill, then we failed. So we need transitional support, especially for older facilities. And Western Riverside Waste Authority is a very old facility, which we're struggling with at the moment. So, and any revenue from carbon permits that should be reinvested locally in greener infrastructure, better recycling, and community education. And this is about climate justice. It's about making sure our waste system reflects our values, fairness, sustainability, and public accountability. And at Western Riverside, we're ready to work with DEFRA, and we're around the table, with ministers, with the Environment Agency and our fellow councils to make this happen. But we need Labour voices at every level, pushing for ambition, pushing for equity, and pushing for that change. And there should be local authority seat at the table with DEFRA, DESNES, and HM Treasury discussions when this and other waste management policy issues are discussed. So, we should be making sure that our colleagues understand that while we're all, back, cutting carbon and capturing emissions, the current setup isn't quite working for local authorities. Right now, if an energy from waste plant installs carbon capture, councils still have to pay the ETS levy, and there's no protection for the public purse. So even if the government chips in with grants to cover the upfront costs, councils are still stuck with ongoing payments. And that means public money ends up paying twice for the same thing. And with the carbon market still in its early days, this can't be how we do things long term. It's not fair and it's not sustainable.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So that you've heard from all of our panel now, can I see an indication of who would like to come in with questions? And I've seen someone has jumped in straight away. Now, I don't know if there's a roving microphone around. There have been. Can I ask you to stand up then? Oh, there might be a roving microphone about to come to you. Look, there they are. I can see them.
Who is it, sorry?
That's a camera, but that's a microphone.
There we go. Thank you.
Play to the camera as well if you want.
Joseph Powell, I work for Veolia. Just looking for numbers, fairly simple question. Councillors, what price do you think is palatable for local authorities to subsume within budgets? Adam gave a very dim figure of 160 million for some councils over years. What price do you think is acceptable within the ETS? And then to Dan and Adam, what price in the ETS do you think is right to drive behaviour change?
Okay. Can I just see if there's anyone else who would like to come? That's kind of two slightly separate questions. Laura, I can see someone here in the front row. Oh.
Cheers, Alan Quinn. I'd share the Greater Manchester Waste Authority. I'll answer your question, nothing. Polluters should pay. I mean, the thing is, I'm out with a double at me and Adam now. But we're incinerating about 500,000 tonnes a year. £40 a tonne, 20 million quid. You expect the ratepayers, the council taxpayers of Greater Manchester, we still haven't come out of austerity. We are still making cuts. And, 30, 40 years ago, we had one bin. Everything went in that. And from Greater Manchester, it went to a landfill in Lincolnshire and we buried it. And we all know what happens with methane, with leachate. And so, and the stuff we are now dealing with.
Alan, do you have a question somewhere?
Yeah.
I can see
I
that
think
you're
it was-
answering Joseph's question,
Yeah.
but I wondered if you had a question for them.
Right, have you any examples of carbon capture and storage actually working or in existence? Sorry, I get like this. I'm sorry, I'm passionate.
Okay, thank you. Laura's going to remove the microphone from you immediately because you'll be answering everyone else's questions as well. But meanwhile, I'm going to come to the panel. Can I just see if there's a third? Actually, we had two kind of questions from Joe. Does anyone else want to come in as well? Okay, so I'm going to start with the councillors and Joseph's question about the price to subsume within the ETS. What's your thoughts on that? Zero, obviously, in Manchester.
It's zero. Let's be perfectly frank. Local government is on its knees following 14 years of being devastated by central government cuts. Temporary accommodation, adult social care, SEND, children's services, in the grand scheme of things, are all way ahead of funding that councils have in this space. And that's the point. It should not be councils and council taxpayers paying for this. It should be retail, manufacturers, hospitality, those who create and who have not changed their packaging and the carbon content of their materials. Even knowing that this was coming, an EPR was coming, they still haven't changed. And the EPR levels and the products that are encompassed by EPR are within their business frameworks to accommodate. They're still not being driven to change. And instead, that kind of lack of understanding that we have in central government still in some of our civil service departments, that lack of understanding how local government works, how our residents work, how this sector works, that divorce that's in place is going to seriously impact our ability to be able to deliver further services. We'll be making cuts to frontline services to pay a tax that we have no control over. How ridiculous does that sound? So nothing can be afforded by local government. We should be being funded the money to deliver the services that government wants us to deliver. We've still not been told about our food waste revenue, annual revenue income, that was promised as a new burden for introducing food waste. Come on. Central government needs to get real. This is too far.
Okay, well, it's a shame that we've had such a wishy-washy answer from Clyde. And we can't quite work out what his opinion is of this. Rezina, how do you feel about this? How much do you think local authorities... You might want to add something to what Clyde has said.
Yeah, I agree with Clyde.
Okay, well, that sounds like a very sensible answer. And I think it was what Alan was intervening and saying as well. Now, I'm going to come to Adam and then Dan. What do you think is the price that would make it worthwhile to crack on with all of this? Bearing in mind that the money may not be coming from local authorities.
Clearly, I've got to pitch my answer carefully here.
Yeah.
I think that the number is almost irrelevant if it doesn't sit with those that can make the decisions.
Yeah.
So, I think we've lived with recycling for a long time where we don't incentivise the public to get it right. And we then sort it out, whether it's Veolia and SUEZ or it's the local authorities or we collaborate. So I think the reality is we're living in a world that isn't perfect. So we could incentivise this as much as we like, and we'd only get so far. So what is the number? I really don't know. But the cost of the externalities from all of these bad decisions in the value chain are hundreds of pounds per tonne. So at some point, we've got to balance the equation. Our current system is wrong. Our products are wrong, and therefore our impact is bad. The system has to change, but we have to do that together.
Okay, I'm feeling that the Chartered Institute of Waste Management will have the answer. Dan?
No pressure.
No pressure.
Yeah.
No pressure at all.
So I think I've got part of an answer. So if the question is what is the price to drive behavioural change, the price is estimated to fall through the ETS landing on energy from waste are on local authorities somewhere in the region of 600 million quid per annum. Commercial and industrial users of energy from waste facilities, 230 million quid per annum, and smaller ones for other users. And that is probably a price that will drive behaviour change. Carbon allowances, 50 to 90 quid a tonne, depending on where they land. That is likely to drive it. And similar to the introduction of the landfill tax, over years, it will drive change. Now, whether the timing is right, and local authority resource limitations are a very real challenge. Government knows that. We know that. Local authorities feel it day in, day out. But if you use that, the ETS projections combined with the EPR costs and offsetting, etc., it is necessary that local authorities will work with government, will work with industry and their service suppliers to work out partnerships to manage that change over time. But the costs will drive change. I don't see government at the moment, despite Clyde's wishes, I don't see them changing course from the messages we're getting from Treasury, from DESNZ. And this is unusual in the waste world in that it's being driven by Treasury and DESNZ, not DEFRA, like lots of the other changes are. So I think those partnerships to work it out and to manage it and to pull the levers, some of which are identified in the SUEZ report, some of which are identified in the report we put out last year, will have to work out how to mitigate this cost over time. There may be pain, and I think meeting financial burdens allowances from government will ease the pain in the first couple of years. We've got 2 years of monitoring to work it out. Government are going to issue their response to the consultation on it probably around the same time as the budget. That should give us clarity about that 2-year window, and then a period to work it out and work out how to implement it. But the answer to the question is the prices that are currently being forecast will drive that change. The second question, I think, do you want us to go on to? Carbon capture, use and storage examples. The first carbon capture from
Actually, existing examples. I think
the first existing example was announced last week, I think it was, with the Encyclist plant in the north, here in the northwest, and the HyNet thing. So a first contract has been let to an energy from waste facility to capture and store its carbon under the Irish Sea. That's the first, and there are others in the pipeline, and that will offset the ETS costs. Likewise, heat networks down in London, in your patch is sort of the other side of London, actually East London. The Cllr Riverside facility's just been announced as a nationally significant project to deliver a heat network from a very large energy from waste plant in southeast London. So heat networks, and there are other examples, Leeds, Cardiff, Sheffield. There are other examples of where these plants are being plugged into heat networks that will offset the costs of the ETS allowances. So there are practical things happening now in the sector that will accelerate. We will have to see more of this coming. But of course, carbon capture is end of pipe stuff. We actually need to move up the waste value chain. And Clyde is dead right. The whole point of this scheme, the whole point of the EPR scheme, is that the pressure and the costs do move up to the producers, and that is happening as well. That is already beginning to drive change as well. So change is painful. There are methods of managing it, but it will come, and some of the mechanisms for change are already being delivered by operators in the sector.
Thank you. Does anyone want to add anything to what Dan was just saying on the second question? No, I'm talking to the panel. Alan, we should have had you on the panel, I can see. On the first contract being let, are there any other actually existing examples that anyone wants to?
No.
That's the technology being proven. Like, here's a scheme that does capture carbon, and we send it into wherever the ice.
Well, a big contract has been let, so it's proven enough, and it will in itself prove further whether or not that type of contract is the future, and that will be refined. It is new technology, it is new methods that are being used, so it's got to be proven, and it will be further proven. But government has enough confidence to have let a very big contract as the first pilot in our sector, so it's happening.
Okay, let's see if there's some. Did you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's in its infancy, isn't it? And like everything in this country, it takes forever to build the infrastructure to then deal with it. So we're probably 20 years away from it being useful to us. But the key part of carbon capture is transportation. I mean, we can build carbon capture infrastructure in London. We've still got to transport it to somewhere, and that's the big cost then in kind of making it a reality.
Okay.
Just to add,
you want to come
sorry.
in?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Okay.
there's enough big resource management companies operating around the world and those that work in petrochemicals to be confident that the technology works. The issue is, does it work at the scale and at the cost model that we're comfortable with? Well, government clearly are confident that they can make this work. I think the debate we're having this morning with the RAE and a few other members is not just about, putting it into deep storage though. We've got to start thinking about products and alternative products that then become part of a circular system. And I think that might be a little bit further away than just putting it in deep sea storage. But I think there's enough of us that are putting money into this to be confident that the technology is deliverable.
Okay, I've seen another couple of hands over here. Somebody there on the end of that row. Thank you, Laura.
I just wanted, Jane Green. I just wanted to ask, what about the value of the materials that you're saving from going into incineration? Because that's pretty great, isn't it? If they're separated, I mean, I think, I haven't looked for a bit, but I mean, certain plastics, £300 or £400, £500 a tonne. And what about the money if DRS goes ahead? Aluminium, I mean, is that money from that aluminium going to go back? That surely must be earmarked.
Okay, and do you want to pass the microphone along to...
Hi there, Dave Chiller, councillor in South London. We're talking about carbon capture and managing the costs of the emissions trading schemes, but no one here as yet has spoken about the emissions from incineration, and the emissions from incineration are significant. I started today's event with a conversation around air quality in London at a first meeting at 8:30. The South London incinerator over a 2-year period didn't meet its exceeded its emissions for 85% of the time. I think it's important to...
Could you be more specific? Which one? Do you mean Selchip?
The South London, Beddington incinerator in South London.
Oh, Beddington. Okay, so we're South West London now.
South West London Waste Partnership.
Sorry, this is slightly boring for anyone.
Sorry, no,
from
forgive me.
London.
But it's important the point to be noted is 85% of the time over a 2-year period exceeded its emissions for nitrogen oxides. And that is a significant issue that no one's speaking about here today. I suppose I'd like to ask the panel, with regard to emissions monitoring, how important is that for a urban environment? And it was mentioned earlier on by Councillor Rezina around the responsibility of local authorities to take emissions monitoring more seriously, even though it's not currently in their remit. They pass it on to the EA to absolve the responsibility. So I'd like to hear thoughts on that, please.
Okay, so a couple of questions there. The value of the materials that are now being removed from being burnt, and in particular, what happens to items that go through DRS, specifically aluminium. So I'm going to start with Clyde and then work along.
Did you want to pick up on the emissions
and then
point?
also the emissions and whether or not, it sounded like you were saying, should councils be monitoring emissions instead of the EA, because it's their responsibility at the moment? In addition. Okay.
So in terms of emissions, we're obviously licensed by the Environment Agency. I think it's probably better that there is an independent organisation monitoring us than actual individual councils doing their own monitoring. We all know how cynical some people can be. But if we're really serious about emissions in London, then, getting vehicles off our roads, that's where you have an impact on emissions in London and improve the air quality. It isn't just the handful of energy from waste facilities that we've got in London. Our serious air quality issue is around vehicles. And then just on, there's been 33 energy from waste facilities given planning permission since 2017 when we got permission for our new one in North London. 33. Only 3 of them have the same global standard of emissions monitoring that we incorporated in ours in 2017. Only 3. So, there are some real questions there around those other 30, what they're going to be doing. But we set ourselves out as an exemplar in this particular space. And then on the materials, those we're already using the monies that we get from the sale of our materials to offset our existing costs now. So it's not that it's not being used, and that's an income. It's not a guaranteed revenue because the markets for aluminium, textiles, card changes almost on a daily basis, and the markets that want them changes almost on a daily basis. So there's some real challenges on basing your services based on the materials that you're collecting, and so I'd be quite cynical about that as a way to totally offset the challenges we have with ETS.
Adam, any thoughts on?
Just to add, I think on the materials, we're already baking it into our contracts. As we make more money, we share that with our customer base, because why wouldn't we? I think going forward, EPR is going to suck up all that money anyway, and much of that material might not be owned by the local authority or the waste operator in the future, because it'll be the producers that own the material because they own the system. So I'm not sure that's going to be the answer at all. So park that one. On the emissions front, I think, the industry is pretty good at sharing its emissions, and live displays outside sites are a regular occurrence. Come and see the display boards. I think we're generally very proud of the performance that the sector provides. Now there are individual sites, and I don't work for that particular company, so I won't get into that debate. But that's life. But I think we've just got to accept that they do what they do, and they fit within the environmental regime that's been set for them, and in many cases go way beyond. Yeah. And I think that's the important thing. We continually strive to deliver better, because we're all in this game to protect the planet. We want to make money on the way, of course we do, but we protect the planet. That's why we're in this game.
Okay, thank you for that, Adam. I'm going to bring in Dan now, who will answer as he wishes on the energy from waste issue and who should be monitoring what, and also on the issue of value. But I think you wanted to come back slightly on one of the other points that was raised earlier.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. It was only the question was about carbon capture, storage and geography. I think it was Clyde said that to transport carbon from London plants would be excessive cost-wise and very difficult logistically. And geography is a really important factor, which is why when we're looking at the ETS, which is where we started here, heat networks and the potential for heat networks in London offer much greater potential than carbon capture, utilisation and storage. And we should be thinking about a circular economy, and the drive towards a more circular economy. Heat trumps CCUS, carbon capture and storage, which is more end of pipe. So we need to move up that chain, and therefore recovering heat and making these plants more efficient. And remember, if ETS does do what it is intended to do and removes fossil fuel packaging from the fuel inputs, these will be good renewable power plants, and we all need more of those. And if they are plugged into heat networks, they are even more efficient renewable power plants, and that has to be the end goal, because this technology isn't going away. And as we said at the start, local authorities have been encouraged by policy and regulation to build or in partnership build and operate these facilities as an end treatment for non-recyclable materials. So that was the key point. Thank you. Permits, I think most has been said, and I did used to work for the company that operates Beddington, so I'm very familiar with it. And some of those breaches are at minute levels, and are technical breaches, we could argue that, but emission standards are really important, is probably the most highly regulated type of facility and sector when it comes to emission standards, regulated well by the Environment Agency. And I would agree with Clyde, if we're concerned with urban air quality, our focus should be on transport rather and reducing transport emissions at the same time as driving further standards and getting well. The Beddington facility does publish its emissions online, live, practically, so the scrutiny and transparency is there. And although it's not performing at a technical level on that particular thing, the public and you yourself as councillors can continue to pressure the operator to make sure they're operating as they should be. The value of materials is a really important point, and again, I'd echo what's been said already, but the value of materials, when the sector is doing well, when the value of materials for recycling is high, they should be sharing them with local authorities, like they should be sharing the energy costs and the energy prices when the profitability from energy plants are high. So there is always good contracts, there is always the ability to do that. And of course we can do more to get more materials out. Simpler recycling is coming, better capture of materials. Flexibles, we can talk about, Clyde's already mentioned, finding markets for flexible plastics is going to be no small challenge, because at the moment they're pretty dead in the water and have been for a long time. But if we're collecting shed loads of this material, hopefully people will see innovative ways of dealing with it and making a buck from it. So that's where we have to say, but capturing more and getting the value out of those materials has to be part of this equation.
Rezina.
I just want to mention something that's I don't think been mentioned, and it's right down to community level, and I'm also going to talk about the fact that council finances are in such a bad way, that I know that councillor colleagues and officers would love to be able to collect more from curbside and our estates, but the funding hasn't always been there. People want to do the right thing, and we have to make it easy. And yes, we have, dry mix recycling in Lambeth. In other parts of the country or other parts of London, people separate out their waste, and we just want to make it easier. But collecting that also is a cost. Collecting small electricals or food waste or garden waste, or the other types of waste that Clyde, you were mentioning, that is an amazing ambition, but sometimes it's harder to try and get that through. Like when I have discussions with cabinet colleagues, when we're trying to battle lots of other things as well, the ambition is there, but unfortunately, unless we have the financial support, it's going to be difficult right at the beginning to do any of those things.
Thank you. Can I see if there's anybody else who wants to come in with a question? I can see that Joseph is sticking his hand up, but he has already asked two. I can now see that there's someone over there. Did you want to come in as well, or were you just waving your arm around? No, you were just moving.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm with Carbon Balance. So you'll never have heard of us. We're a very small NGO. We work with the University of Oxford, Oxford Net Zero. We're very interested in developing policies in particular that look at the polluter pays principle and trying to apply that to various sectors, in particular the fossil fuel industry. An example of a policy is the injection capacity obligation in the EU that's been recently raised. I'll try not to ramble too much, but just to give you a flavor of the type of policies we study. I would be very interested to understand the panel's take on whether something similar to that, so a mandate type policy on the fossil fuel industry in the UK to help develop and fund and support some of the CCUS infrastructure and costs, would be of interest to the energy from waste sector, or if we're sort of barking up the wrong tree there and it might be best applied to others. So I'm very happy to have a longer conversation and explain more what this policy looks like, but I would just love to get first reactions on whether that's relevant to energy from waste in the UK.
That's great, thank you. And you were waving your hand. Yep. You would like to wave your hand. Okay, just bring the microphone over to you. Thank you. And then actually, I'm going to take you as well, Joseph, and then I think that's probably going to be all the questions we'll have time for.
Yeah. Simon Pearce, I'm a councillor in Royal Borough of Greenwich. And actually, funnily enough, my day job is in working for a resource company around who do carbon trading, so in the EU ETS. So this has actually made my hair stand on end, as you can see.
I thought it might have been
I know, because for whatever reason, I had no idea this thing was coming. What from a political perspective, what can we as kind of local councillors and local elected people do with DESNZ to impact this? Right. So from a sort of policy area, that's my kind of question.
What, to ameliorate?
Just to, something. Well, just tell us what we need to do.
Can you pass the microphone to Joseph? Thank you.
Just very quickly, given the mentions on finances for local authorities, particularly over the coming years, do you think there's merit in deferring the entry of waste into the scheme beyond it was planned 28, but do you think there's merit in deferring beyond that?
Okay, so three very different questions. I'm going to start with Dan this time, because I keep picking on Clyde and Adam first.
That's harsh, but I'll go
Sorry.
with it. Policy measures, polluter pays. I'd argue that this is part of that, because EPR and the ETS should, and that we are assured there will be a mechanism to link the ETS and in energy from waste scheme with EPR payments. We're pushing for clarity on what that mechanism looks like. DESNZ haven't and Treasury haven't come back to explain that yet, but we are assured that there will be. So whether that And at the moment, we were discussing this earlier, whether that means that EPR costs per material, all the non-recyclable plastics, the cost of those in the EPR scheme goes up as soon as this is introduced. At the moment, that's the simple way of reading that. So there is a policy measure, arguably, that should help fund or drive and incentivise things like carbon capture, heat networks, the things that offset the fossil fuel inputs into these plants. So we can talk more in terms of details, but at big picture stuff, that's the only thing I can think of that's relevant to this particular challenge, where a policy measure is being introduced that should indirectly or arguably directly influence the fossil fuel producers, polluters. What can local authorities do with DESNZ? So local authorities have been well represented. There is a stakeholder group that's been talking to DESNZ, talking to Treasury, talking to the Environment Agency, all of this, how to make this scheme work. It is undoubtedly being driven, as I said, by a heady combination of Treasury and DESNZ. They seem determined. We have done, the representatives of the sector have done our best to explain that energy from waste plants are slightly different from other energy plants, in that the local authorities and the commercial producers, inputters, customers don't have the same level of control. It is not a ubiquitous fuel you are feeding in, and therefore there are other factors, and they have taken that into account. That's why they've got a 2-year voluntary monitoring period to get the data right, get the cost allocations right, etc. The main point is local authorities have been well represented on that stakeholder group through ADEPT, through Nordo. Those are the two main groups. They have started with being very kind of entrenched in a this should not happen position, and this is informal description. They have come to understand that this will probably happen, and therefore the current position is, so how do we best mitigate this? How do we make the best deal? And how do we offset the costs? How do we get a gentle introduction, additional burdens, etc., etc.? So I think the voice is being heard, but that's down to your representatives to tell you more. Is there merit in deferring? I don't know. I mean, the big issue with local authorities and costs and resources has been very well made, and there is undoubtedly something to be levelled out there. Is there merit in deferring this alongside all the other measures? Arguably no, because it will drive change towards a net zero transition, which we're all working towards, and therefore innovation and economics will balance it out. I don't see deferral as being particularly sensible at this point, because we are so far down the track, but that will be for the politicians to decide.
Thank you. Rezina, do you have any thoughts on whether or not the fossil fuel industry should be paying to develop CCS, the political perspective, and what else we can do to ameliorate the situation, or whether or not things should be deferred?
On the deferral, I'm not sure. We all want to do the right thing. I mean, we've been waiting a long time for these policies to kick in, and I don't want to be seen as delaying anything. But I'll keep saying this: we just need more help. We need government to step up, because otherwise it's local authorities that are going to be carrying the burden, and you can't expect us to. We're as Clyde said, we're on our knees. We can't be expected to do this without some help from government. And we can't, we're being asked to overhaul waste systems, cut carbon, and absorb new costs without funding, or sometimes without clarity. So we need proper investment, and I'll say it until I'm blue in the face, but that's going to be my answer.
Thank you. Adam, any thoughts on any of these?
On the mandate question, I think, if we could get, fossil fuel companies, petrochem companies, if they want to put a load of money into some of the innovation projects that are happening around the world, so that we've got the next phase of carbon capture and carbon utilisation and some of the products that we're going to have to build out of the carbon that we capture, then I'm all for that. But I don't think meddling with the system is necessary where we are. Local council input, yeah, we're on the journey, aren't we? I think what I would say is make sure it's on the local council conversation at your next meeting, and stays on there, because this is a big old number for those of you that have got energy from waste as a disposal option, and you need to be having the conversations about what could we do, because some of the innovation that we suggest in our report, you're going to take 6 to 9 months to get some of those systems up and running, and you're going to need to find some budget to instigate that. So earlier conversations better than late. And deferring, I'm with Dan on this one. I mean, I think you could defer it, but it's not going to help us drive change. And the other reforms, EPR, DRS, simpler recycling, etc., aren't being deferred. So there's going to be a whole heap of change. This is all aligned in that respect. So I think, no, you're stuck with it.
I thought I'd come to Clyde last. I know we run the risk of another one of his wishy-washy answers, but I thought maybe he might be able to come forward with a few thoughts on all of those, the fossil fuel industry, the political input, and then whether or not we should defer. Clyde, over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, some of us have been lobbying government on ETS at a political level for probably about 10 years now, since it's kind of first started to kind of manifest as a suggestion. And to be brutally honest, the previous government didn't want to engage with certainly local politicians that were involved in this particular agenda. And EPR, offsetting ETS costs, was certainly not on the previous government's agenda. So in some respects, we have seen some progress, because this government has now actually given us our first EPR payments, and it's been delayed for a number of years, but our government has given us those EPR payments and has now said it will be something to offset against. However, many of us who've been in discussions around EPR for many years always believed that payment was not to offset ETS. It was to actually provide the costs associated with us subsidising manufacturing and retail and hospitality for the disposal of their unsustainable products. So, there's been some confusing messages for a number of years in this space, but there has been some progress. Now, and it's great that myself, Rezina, and a number of others, yourself as well, sit round the table with Mary Cray every couple of months. We never had that opportunity under the previous government. However, we do on ETS keep being bounced around between DESNES, DEFRA, Treasury, MHCLG. No one really wants to take ownership of the real big problem that this is giving local government, on top of all the other really big problems that local government financing has got to face. And that's a real issue for us to kind of be heard. In terms of how it would potentially work, I think we should defer. I'm going to be slightly controversial. I think it should be deferred for local government. Let's see how it settles for non-municipal waste and charging first. Let that bed in. Let all the simpler recycling changes bed in first and foremost. Then let's see where we are. Let's exempt local government EFW for the time being. And one of the other points I just kind of want to touch on, we own 100% own our EFW. When electricity rates went up, the previous government decided to tax us. We've lost over £20 million in tax because of that. That's £20 million that could have been coming back into my constituent local authorities to help, prepare for ETS, prepare for better recycling, or deal with some of the temporary accommodation issues, some of the adult social care challenges that we're facing. We're being hammered and taxed all over the place on stuff we have very little control over. And it's a real challenge to us. But, there's still a debate. There's still some dialogue to be had. Let's see what these next 2 years shows. But I'm very, very fearful of what that next 2 years will show. And just finally, the charge on ETS will fluctuate every year. Local government has been arguing hard for 3-year budgets. 3-year budgets, so we have some certainty. This builds in, once again, huge amounts of uncertainty into our ability to budget going forward on some of those other services. So it's a real challenge in just the way it works. And that's because none of those government departments want to talk to each other and work out how to protect local services and deliver some ambition in this particular space.
Well, thank you very much. And I hope you would just show your appreciation to our panel. And I'm sure you'll all agree with me that this has been a really interesting discussion with people who are really knowledgeable about exactly where we are, and also, I'm afraid, where we aren't on this journey. This is a very difficult and very complicated area. And, you know, there is clearly much more that needs to be discussed and resolved. It's going to be very difficult given the financial circumstances of local authorities up and down the country. You know, just down the south of Lambeth is Croydon, and it's sort of southeast of Wandsworth, where I am a councillor as well as being a London Assembly member. They had to declare a Section 114. Basically, we are bankrupt. They are not the only council who are in that position. Woking has actually got debts of about £2.5 billion while it was being run by the Tories. Croydon was at the time being run by Labour. It's all authorities are on the brink. Many are really struggling, and these are new burdens that we're expecting local authorities to pick up. But we, at the same time, you can hear there's an appetite for taking these things forward. And I'm sure these are issues that you're grappling with in your local areas. Thank you so much for coming. Can I just encourage you, if you're not a member of SERA, you will find on your seat there's a flyer that says join us, and part of what we're focusing on is the campaign. Ben is modelling the brochure that you need to find. You know, the support for nature is a big way also of fighting back against reform. A lot of the work that we're talking about here is, you know, would probably be dismantled by reform if they start taking control of councils and county councils across the country. We know that they had some successes last May. So there's some urgency here in terms of saving the planet and also keeping reform out next May. But really do join with us in terms of exposing and debating these really important issues. Thank you so much for being with us.